Beneath the ruins of an abandoned monastery, a forgotten manuscript stirs in the dust. Its parchment, brittle as autumn leaves, bears lines written in ink that seems to fade and reappear with the shifting light of dawn. The monks who once guarded it are long dead, their names lost to centuries, yet the words remain, like whispers echoing across time. They speak not only of kings and knights, but of betrayals so deep that kingdoms crumbled into shadow. The air within the cloister smells of damp stone and charred wood, as though fire once tried to consume what memory itself could not erase. The first pages tell of a realm unnamed, a kingdom erased from common histories, yet hinted at in fragments of chronicles scattered across Europe. The manuscript dares to join them, binding fact and legend into one dangerous tale. And here is the second hook, drawing the listener further in. The script suggests that this vanished kingdom did not fall to foreign invasion, nor to famine or plague, but to treachery within its own walls. Its throne was emptied not by battle, but by betrayal sealed in blood. Yet curiously, the chronicler insists the crown itself was never buried with its last king. Instead, it was hidden, entrusted to shadows, its power unresolved. The handwriting itself changes as the chapters progress. At times it flows with the neat precision of a monk's steady hand, and at others it becomes erratic, slanted, as though written in fever or fear. Marginalia scrawl warnings in Latin, "Beware the serpent in the garden." Beneath these warnings are symbols not belonging to any faith, circles entwined, marks like talons, strange ciphers whose meaning eludes even modern scholars. Some believe the manuscript was a palimpsest, written and rewritten across generations, each scribe daring to add what others had erased. Descriptions within its pages paint vivid portraits of medieval life, though with an undertone of dread. It speaks of great halls hung with banners of crimson and gold, of tournaments where knights shone like silver under the sun, and of feasts where goblets clinked in merriment. Yet beneath the triumphs lay omens, black birds circling above jests, whispers of wells running dry after royal weddings, and priests who muttered prayers to ward off unseen forces. The text lingers often on the figure of a king, never named directly but described as the last crowned shadow. He is depicted as a man of charisma and ferocity, beloved by his people yet haunted by a destiny foretold before his birth. The chronicler recounts that a prophecy clung to his lineage, that no crown of his bloodline would rest peacefully in earth, for the soil itself rejected their dominion. Rumors grow darker in the later passages. The manuscript hints at a betrayal carried out not by enemies on the field, but by those seated at the high table. A poisoned chalice? A dagger in the dark? The words are tantalizingly incomplete, as if the writer's hand trembled away at the most crucial moment. Some historians argue this was deliberate, that knowledge of the betrayer was too dangerous to inscribe. Others suggest the missing lines were torn out deliberately, stolen to protect a legacy or to curse it further. What is certain is that the fall of this shadowed kingdom was sudden. One entry describes bells tolling over a silent city, their peals echoing across empty streets, unanswered. The chronicler writes of a queen's veil left on the steps of the cathedral, of banners burned by unseen hands, and of a royal crypt sealed with wax and lead. But even here the narrative contradicts itself. In the margins a second scribe insists that the crypt was empty, that the king's body was never found, and that the true resting place of the crown lay elsewhere, waiting. Centuries later, fragments of the same tale resurface in other sources. A Norman chronicler mentions the hidden diadem of the Britons. A troubadour's song in Occitan whispers of a crown lost beneath the waters of Avalon. Even in distant Germanic lands, sagas speak of a treasure cursed to outlast dynasties. The manuscript seems less a single record than the woven thread of a pan-European riddle, one in which truth and legend coil around each other like serpents. And perhaps that is why it was hidden. Knowledge of crowns unburied, of kings unfound, of betrayals unpunished. These are the kinds of truths that undermine dynasties. For if a kingdom could vanish overnight, if a crown could wait in silence beneath the soil, then who among the living rulers could claim their own power was secure? The final pages of the manuscript are nearly illegible, stained by water and smoke. Yet one line remains, written more boldly than any other, as though the scribe knew it would endure when all else faded. It reads, "The crown was never buried." The name echoes across centuries like the toll of a great bell, Camelot. For some, it is the symbol of noble ideals, a shining court where justice, honor, and valor held sway. For others, it is a myth woven by poets to cloak darker truths beneath the glitter of legend. Yet whether dream or history, the shadow of Camelot stretches across the medieval world, entwined with both memory and imagination. Bards sing of Arthur, the once and future king, who drew a sword from stone and united warring lords beneath a single banner. Chronicles speak of him not as a fairy tale figure, but as a war leader in a Britain scarred by the retreat of Rome and the advance of Saxon steel. Some claim his victories were real, won on bloody fields where knights did not yet wear shining armor but chain and leather, their shields marked with crude sigils. Still, the image of Camelot endures, its halls polished marble, its tables round, its ideals unbroken. Here comes the second hook, drawing the listener deeper. But what if Camelot's splendor was a mask? What if the shining table of unity was built to conceal cracks in the kingdom's very foundation? For woven through the tales are whispers of betrayal, forbidden love, and sorcery that walks the thin line between salvation and ruin. To believe in Camelot is to believe also in its fall, and the shadows it cast upon every throne that followed. The chronicles are contradictory. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 12th century, painted Arthur's realm as a golden age, rich with glory and expansion. Yet older fragments tell of endless strife. Famine gnawed at villages, raiders stalked the coastlines, and plague seeped through the cracks of crumbling towns. The truth may be that Camelot was less a paradise and more a fragile hope in an age of despair. The poets who sang of Arthur may have done so not to describe what was, but to preserve what was needed, an ideal of kingship when kings themselves faltered. Still, the legends linger on details too vivid to dismiss. They tell of Guinevere, queen of rare beauty yet caught between love and loyalty, of Lancelot, a knight whose skill at arms was matched only by his fatal weakness of heart, of Mordred, the traitor's son who split the realm in two. In these figures history and myth blur, for while their names may belong to story, their actions mirror the betrayals and scandals that plagued real courts across medieval Europe. Consider the Round Table itself, so often depicted as a perfect circle symbolizing unity. Yet some scholars argue it was not a physical table at all, but a symbol of sworn brotherhood, an oath that could be as easily broken as upheld. Others claim a real table did exist, carved from oak and later preserved at Winchester, though whether it belonged to Arthur or to a later king seeking to clothe himself in Arthur's legend remains a mystery. What is certain is this: kings throughout the Middle Ages, from Henry II to Edward I, invoked Arthur's name to legitimize their own rule. Camelot became less a court of the past and more a weapon of politics. But in the manuscript uncovered at the monastery, Camelot is portrayed with a darker pen. The chronicler writes of a hall, where shadows gathered beneath the banners, and a king, whose heart was divided between crown and prophecy. More troubling still, he suggests that the fall of Camelot was not merely the result of human weakness, lust, pride, betrayal, but of a curse bound to the very crown Arthur wore. It was a gift of Avalon, the scribe warns, but gifts of the Fae demand payment. This notion, dangerous though it sounds, is not entirely without precedent. Medieval superstition was rife with tales of cursed regalia, crowns that burned the scalps of usurpers, swords that broke in the hands of cowards, jewels that carried pestilence. If Arthur's crown, or the relics of his kingdom, were touched by such enchantment, then perhaps the fate of Camelot was sealed long before Mordred raised his blade. The manuscript lingers on the Battle of Camlan, the fateful clash that ended Arthur's reign. While poets describe it as the last stand of a noble king, the chronicler hints at something far stranger. He writes of the sky darkening at midday, of birds falling dead from the air, of men who dropped their swords and fled screaming from visions no one else could see. These are not the details of ordinary war. They are omens, portents, signs that something beyond human ambition decided Camelot's fate. And then, the most chilling line: the king did not die, for Avalon does not bury its own. Here the manuscript and the legend intertwine. For centuries, storytellers claimed Arthur was carried to Avalon to sleep, not perish, until Britain's hour of greatest need. But what if Avalon was less a haven than a prison? What if the king's slumber was no blessing, but a curse tied to the same crown that destroyed his realm? If so, the whispers of Camelot's survival may be less about hope, and more about warning. In the margins, a later hand scribbled one final note beside the story of Camlan: "Seek not the crown of Avalon, for it seeks you in return." And so Camelot fades into the mist, a beacon of glory or a shadow of doom, perhaps both at once. But if the crown survived, hidden and unburied, then the fall of Camelot was not an ending. It was a beginning. They rode beneath a red cross stitched upon white cloaks, their swords gleaming in the sun, their banners whipping in the desert wind. To their allies they were holy warriors, guardians of pilgrims and champions of Christendom. To their enemies they were demons in armor, relentless as the tide. But to those who whispered in the shadows of medieval Europe, The Knights Templar were something else entirely, custodians of secrets so dangerous that kings and popes alike feared their power. From humble beginnings, the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon rose with meteoric swiftness. Founded in the early 12th century to protect travelers in the Holy Land, the Templars soon became more than warriors. They grew into bankers, diplomats, and architects of influence, building a network that spanned continents. Castles rose in their name and treasures flowed into their vaults. For 2 centuries, their red cross was a mark of power as much as piety. And here the second hook grips the listener. But no order rises so high without casting shadows. Behind their vows of poverty and chastity lingered rumors of forbidden rites. Behind their wealth lay whispers of a treasure not measured in gold. And behind their fall was a curse so potent that it echoed long after their ashes scattered to the wind. The chronicles of the Holy Land speak of strange discoveries beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the Templars first made their headquarters. Some claimed they unearthed relics beyond price, perhaps the Ark of the Covenant, perhaps relics of Christ's Passion, or perhaps something far darker. Whatever they found, they did not speak of it openly. Yet their sudden wealth and influence suggested that the Knights had touched a secret vein of power, one that ordinary kings could never mine. By the 13th century, the order had become too powerful for comfort. Kings owed them debts, nobles feared their strength. Whispers spread that the Templars worshipped a hidden idol, a horned figure known as Baphomet, and that their ceremonies involved rites forbidden by both church and crown. Whether these charges were truth or invention, they gained traction in a Europe hungry for scandal and greed. It was Philip IV of France, called Philip the Fair, who struck the decisive blow. Desperate for wealth to fill his coffers, the king turned on the very knights who had once defended his throne. On a single day in October 1307, the Templars across France were arrested, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable crimes. Their leaders were tortured, forced to confess, and condemned to burn. The flames consumed not only their bodies but their secrets. And yet, as Grand Master Jacques de Molay burned at the stake, he cried out a curse, that Pope Clement V and King Philip would soon meet him before the judgment of God. Within the year both were dead. Coincidence, say the rational. Judgment, say the faithful. A curse, whisper the fearful. But what of the treasure, the secret that had fueled the Templars' rise? Legends tell of carts of gold spirited away from Paris the night before the arrests, vanishing into the mist. Ships of the Templar fleet slipped anchor and sailed into the unknown, never to be seen again. Some claim they reached Scotland, where they merged with local brotherhoods and gave birth to new orders of secrecy. Others insist the treasure was not material at all, but knowledge, a truth too dangerous to entrust to any crown or pope. The manuscript discovered in the ruined monastery adds another layer. Its pages hint that the Templars' true charge was not wealth but a crown, one linked to Avalon itself. They bore it across the sea, the scribe writes, for in it slept both power and peril. Could it be that the same unburied crown spoken of in Arthurian legend passed through the hands of the Templars? If so, it might explain why their downfall came with such sudden violence, as though forces beyond mere politics sought to extinguish their flame. Even centuries after their destruction, the Templars refused to rest quietly. Their symbols appear in hidden corners of cathedrals, in forgotten manuscripts, and in the architecture of castles that stand like silent sentinels. Some say the order never truly died, that its survivors bound themselves by oath to guard their secret across the generations. Others believe their treasure, whether gold or relic, still lies waiting, hidden in vaults, buried beneath stone, or sleeping in the soil of forgotten battlefields. But one truth clings to their memory like smoke: the Templars' story does not end in fire. For the crown they carried, if crown it was, could not be destroyed by mortal hands. And if it waits still, then so too does the shadow of the order sworn to guard it. And somewhere in the margins of history, a warning remains: the crown was never buried. It was entrusted to us. The Tower of London rises like a fortress of stone and shadow, its walls bearing the weight of nearly 1,000 years of fear. Built by William the Conqueror as a symbol of power, it became more than a castle. It was a prison, a treasury, and a stage for death. Kings crowned within its halls often feared the very stones that guarded them, for the tower was said to drink in every drop of blood spilled upon its ground. To step through its gates was to feel history pressing close, chains rattling in unseen corridors, whispers of prayers cut short, and the echoes of ravens whose wings still darken the sky. Tourists today see a monument, but to medieval eyes the tower was a living presence, a place where crowns were guarded and fates were sealed. The yeoman warders spoke of it not as a building, but as a keeper of secrets. Here comes the second hook to draw deeper attention. And among all its legends, none are more chilling than the ravens. For centuries they have haunted the tower, black shapes perched upon battlements, their eyes gleaming like obsidian. Some believe they are ordinary birds, well-fed and clipped to remain. Others swear they are omens, bound by prophecy. Should the ravens ever leave, the kingdom itself will fall. The chronicles of medieval London record the tower as both sanctuary and snare. Kings held their coronation banquets within its walls, yet traitors and queens alike walked to their deaths beneath its shadow. Anne Boleyn, wife of Henry VIII, was executed here, her blood staining the stones even as ravens circled above. Richard III was accused of murdering his young nephews within the tower's walls, their cries said to linger in the night air. The boundary between history and ghost tale blurs, for the tower does not easily give up its truths. But the manuscript from the monastery adds a darker note, linking the tower not just to executions but to the crown itself. One scribe claims that in the 14th century, the unburied crown of Avalon was briefly housed within the tower, locked away in a chamber beneath the White Tower itself. The birds grew restless, the text warns, and the sky blackened for 7 nights. If true, this would explain the strange persistence of the raven legend. Perhaps they are not guardians of the kingdom, but of the relic kept hidden within its walls. In the medieval mind, the raven was no mere bird. It was a messenger of war, a harbinger of death, a scavenger that followed armies across the fields of Europe. Norse sagas speak of Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who flew across the world gathering secrets. To tether such creatures to the tower was to bind prophecy itself, to anchor fate within stone. And yet, the tower has never been without them. Even in times of plague, fire and rebellion, the birds remained, circling the battlements as if bound by unseen chains. When Charles II ordered that ravens be protected within the tower in the 17th century, he may have been reviving a superstition already ancient. But in truth, the legend stretches far deeper into the medieval centuries, rooted in a fear that the birds were tied not to the crown of kings, but to the crown of shadows. A curious marginal note in the manuscript makes this claim explicit. If the crown lies in darkness, the ravens must remain, lest the kingdom be consumed. Scholars dismiss this as fancy, a flight of imagination from a superstitious scribe. Yet others wonder, were the birds not merely symbols but watchmen? If so, their presence even now is less quaint tradition than unbroken vigil. The tower stones have seen rivers of blood and the rise and fall of dynasties. They have heard the cries of the condemned, the coronation oaths of kings, and the scratching of quills writing decrees of death. But the ravens remain unmoved, watching, waiting. For as the manuscript warns, should they ever leave their post, it will not be the tower that falls. It will be the kingdom itself, undone by the unburied crown waiting in the shadows below. It came without warning, a silent rider galloping across Europe, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The Black Death swept through kingdoms like a storm of shadows, striking rich and poor alike, reducing bustling cities to graveyards. To the medieval mind it was no mere illness. It was the hand of God, the curse of the devil, or perhaps both at once. In the summer of 1347 ships arrived in Messina, their holds heavy with grain and death. Rats scurried from the docks, fleas leapt unseen, and soon the air itself seemed poisoned. Within weeks bodies piled in the streets. Chroniclers describe men and women struck by swellings as large as apples, darkened with blood, bursting with stench. Priests marched in processions, swinging incense to ward away the invisible terror, but the smoke did little. The bells tolled endlessly. Europe itself seemed to be dying. Here the second hook seizes the listener's breath. But behind the terror lay whispers of something stranger still. Some claimed the plague was not born of rats or fleas, but carried by the wind like a curse, guided by hands unseen. Others whispered that it followed the path of relics, that wherever the crown of Avalon was rumored to pass, pestilence followed close behind. Could the Black Death have been more than a disease? Could it have been a shadow of the crown itself? The numbers defied comprehension. In some villages, entire populations perished. In Florence, Boccaccio wrote that fathers abandoned sons, wives abandoned husbands, and the very bonds of humanity dissolved in fear. Fields went unplowed, markets stood empty, and wolves wandered through towns that once rang with laughter. In England, half the clergy were said to have died, leaving monasteries silent, their libraries locked and abandoned. But the manuscript from the monastery suggests an unsettling connection. In a marginal note, a scribe records that in the year of the plague, a sealed chest was carried north under the guard of cloaked riders. Where the chest passed, he writes, The pestilence came swiftly as if drawn to it. Was this coincidence, or did the relic within, the unburied crown, carry with it a sickness beyond mortal understanding? Medieval superstition eagerly filled the void of knowledge. Flagellants roamed the streets, whipping themselves bloody in the hope of appeasing divine wrath. Others accused the Jews of poisoning wells, a lie that led to massacres across the continent. But beneath these human cruelties, the deeper fear remained, that the plague was not natural but fated. A punishment written into the world by forces older than kings. Some chroniclers even describe visions. Men on their deathbeds claimed to see shadowy figures standing at their doors, holding scales in one hand and a crown in the other. Women dreamed of rivers running black, of crows blotting out the sun, of bells ringing though no hand pulled their ropes. These were dismissed as delirium, yet the manuscript preserves them carefully, as though they were not madness but warnings. In the East, travelers brought back darker rumors still. In the lands beyond Constantinople, it was said that entire caravans were consumed in a single night, their bodies left twisted, their eyes wide with terror. A Persian chronicler writes that the plague was not sickness at all, but a smoke that clung to men's shadows, devouring them from within. He too mentions a crown described as blackened with age, yet shining with fire when touched by moonlight. If true, then the Black Death may not have been the work of fleas or rats, but of a relic carried across centuries. A relic bound to Avalon, cursed to drink the life of kingdoms as it moved. And yet, the crown was never destroyed. The manuscript ends this chapter with a final, chilling line. As the pestilence passed, the crown was sealed again, but the earth remembers its touch. In the far reaches of medieval Europe, where forests stretched endless and the wind howled through black pines, there lingered tales of a woman both feared and revered. They called her the Witch of the North Woods. To peasants, she was a healer, a keeper of herbs who mended wounds when priests could not. To lords and bishops, she was a threat, a whisper of the old pagan ways that refused to die. And to those who studied the manuscript hidden in the ruined monastery, she was something more, someone tied by fate to the unburied crown. Her story begins not in castles but in cottages, in the huts of hunters and shepherds who brought her offerings of bread and salt. They said she could call the rain with chants, or still the bleeding of a wound with a single word. Children feared her shadow, yet mothers sought her aid in childbirth. She lived between fear and necessity, tolerated yet never welcomed. And always the church frowned, for every act of healing beyond their control seemed to them a step closer to heresy. Here the second hook seizes the listener. But when plague swept the land and when armies marched through the forests leaving ash in their wake, the Witch of the North Woods was said to have vanished for 3 nights. When she returned, her eyes were darkened as though she had looked into fire, and in her hands she carried a crown of black iron, heavy with rust. She claimed it was unearthed from beneath the roots of an oak struck by lightning. Some said she forged it. Others swore it called to her. The manuscript records her trial centuries later, though the account is fragmented. It speaks of inquisitors sent into the deep forests, bearing torches and crosses, to drag her before the judgment of the church. The charges were the usual litany: witchcraft, consorting with demons, blasphemy. But in the margins another hand writes, they feared her not for charms, but for the crown she would not yield. Legends swirl around her final days. One tale claims she was burned at the stake, her screams rising above the roar of the fire as the crown melted into the earth. Another says she escaped, vanishing into the woods, leaving only ash and the impression of her chains in the soil. Yet another insists the executioners themselves fell ill before her trial could be carried out, their bodies blackened as though scorched from within. The villagers who once sought her healing left behind their own whispers. They spoke of seeing her walk among the trees at night, her shadow longer than her form, her hands clutching something wrapped in cloth. One shepherd swore he saw her burying an object in a hollow beneath a stone, chanting words in no tongue he recognized. When he returned later to dig, the hollow was empty, the stone unmovable. But the most disturbing account comes again from the manuscript, written in a hand different from the others, frantic and scrawled. She bound the crown to the earth with blood not her own. And when the roots grew around it, the forest itself became her prison. To this day, in remote corners of the north, locals whisper of a clearing where birds will not sing and where moss grows thicker than anywhere else. Travelers speak of hearing faint chanting, or of finding their fires extinguished without cause. They say that on certain nights, a woman's figure can be glimpsed at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting, with eyes that burn like embers in the dark. And though the records of her trial vanish into silence, one truth remains: the Witch of the North Woods was bound not by chains or fire, but by the same relic that had haunted kings, toppled kingdoms, and spread plague across the land. For the crown she carried was not lost. It was only sleeping, hidden beneath the roots, waiting for the one who would dare to wake it. The year was marked by famine and unrest. Castles once thought unassailable now stood as fragile fortresses against hunger, betrayal, and the relentless march of war. Among these strongholds was Blackthorn Keep, perched on a jagged hill where the wind screamed like tortured souls. It was here, the chronicles claim, that the shadow of the cursed crown revealed its power most violently. At dawn, the banners of a rival lord appeared upon the horizon, black wolves on a field of crimson. The garrison within Blackthorn numbered few, and their supplies were thin. Yet the defenders lit their torches and prepared the cauldrons of boiling pitch, for surrender was not an option. They did not know that the true battle would not be fought with sword or arrow, but with something older, darker, and unseen. Here the second hook strikes like a drumbeat. On the second night of the siege, when the moon lay shrouded behind storm clouds, the attackers reported seeing a figure walking the battlements. Cloaked, silent, and taller than any man, it carried no torch. Arrows loosed at the shape vanished into the air as if swallowed by mist. And when dawn rose, the attackers found their wells fouled, their horses sickened, and their captains stricken with fever. The defenders whispered of a curse. Some swore that the witch of the northern woods had returned, her shadow cast upon the keep to protect it. Others believed the Lord of Blackthorn himself had uncovered the crown and made a pact, trading his soul for strength. The truth was never written clearly, but the manuscript notes in its brittle ink. The siege was not won with stone nor steel, but with the terror of things unseen. Weeks passed and still the attackers could not breach the walls. Their food rotted overnight, their weapons rusted without rain. Strange fires burned in the forest at night, twisting the shadows of trees into the likeness of armored men. Soldiers deserted, claiming they heard voices calling their names from the dark. One night, driven mad, stormed the keep's gates alone, shouting that he would tear the crown from the usurper's head. He never returned. Inside the keep things were no less dire. The defenders too began to feel the weight of the curse. Bread spoiled before it touched their lips. Infants cried endlessly, and their mothers swore unseen hands rocked the cradles. Men guarding the battlements fell asleep on their posts, plagued by dreams of burning thrones and faceless kings. It was as though the relic demanded fear from all who lingered too close, foe and ally alike. By the 41st day the besieging army, once 20,000 strong, had dwindled to scattered bands of starving men. Some fled, others died muttering about black crowns and shadowed kings. Blackthorn Keep had not fallen. Yet the victory was hollow, for those within the walls began to ask whether their salvation had been bought at a cost far greater than defeat. The final entry in the chronicle of the siege is as haunting as it is brief. The gates opened, though no enemy remained. They did not march forth as men but as shades. Deep in the hidden chambers of medieval cities, where torches flickered and stone walls were blackened with smoke, alchemists labored in secret. They sought gold, yes, but their ambitions went far beyond mere wealth. Some whispered that they pursued immortality, others that they sought a power that could bend kingdoms to a single will. And among their forbidden experiments, one object stood at the center of legend, the unburied crown of Avalon. In a laboratory lit by glowing crucibles, an alchemist mixed powders of lead, mercury, and substances so rare that few even knew their names. The manuscript describes his work in meticulous detail, though the meaning remains cryptic. Add a drop of night's shadow, a trace of blood from the north, and the fire will awaken what sleeps. What he sought was not simply gold, but the energy of the crown itself, a force said to burn with the memory of kings and the curses of the fallen. The second hook comes, pulling the listener further into the danger. One night, as the moon rose behind clouds that bled silver light, the fire within his crucible leapt higher than flame should allow. Shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes of warriors long dead, their eyes gleaming in terror and command. The alchemist recoiled, yet he could not stop. A voice, unseen, whispered through the smoke, "Awaken what was hidden and pay the price." Alchemists were both feared and protected by kings. A ruler might grant a laboratory space, fearing the secrets within could save a throne, or destroy it. Some succeeded in turning base metals to gold, but the manuscript warns that these successes were fleeting. The fire they invoked often carried more than wealth. Illness, madness, or sudden death could strike those who sought too much. And in rare cases the object at the center, whether a gem, a relic, or a crown, was known to call out in dreams, commanding obedience. Across Europe, reports of alchemical disasters spread like whispers of doom. In Paris, A workshop exploded in flames, reducing a street to rubble and leaving a trail of blackened bodies, yet no trace of the alchemist was ever found. In Venice, an experiment melted stone floors and sent bronze statues toppling, killing all who entered. Each tale hints at the crown, present in shadows, influencing events beyond mortal comprehension. The manuscript itself describes one particularly daring alchemist who sought to harness the crown directly. He carried it to the peak of a cliff overlooking the sea, chanting formulas that bent the wind and turned waves to black foam. The sky grew violent, stars vanished behind clouds, and the air stank of brimstone. When he descended, nothing remained of the ritual but scorched earth, and a single note inscribed in ashes: "Power obeys but the crown remembers." Legends suggest that such knowledge was not merely dangerous, it was alive. Some alchemists claimed the crown could choose its keeper, granting visions or strength only to those deemed worthy, and punishing the unworthy with madness or death. Others whispered that it was a key, linking mortal hands to the realm of Avalon itself, a bridge between the living and the sleeping kings of legend. By the close of the 14th century, few dared to pursue such knowledge. Libraries were burned, formulas hidden, and orders of secrecy sworn by those who still remembered the crown's power. Yet even then the manuscript insists, its influence endured, passing unseen from hand to hand, continent to continent, like a shadow that cannot die. The final words of this chapter chill the spine. Those who seek the fire find only the crown, and those who touch the crown find the fire. Night fell over the winding roads of medieval Europe, where lanterns flickered in taverns and the cries of weary travelers echoed against ancient stone. Crossroads were more than intersections of dirt and cobblestone, they were places of choice, of chance, and of danger. And in these shadowed places outlaws thrived. Thieves, assassins, and mercenaries made their living in the spaces between law and chaos, their stories entwined with kings, knights, and the cursed crown that haunted the continent. The manuscript describes these roads with a mix of awe and terror. Travelers who thought themselves safe often found themselves surrounded by figures cloaked in black, daggers glinting like shards of night. Some of these outlaws were simple brigands, others were knights fallen from grace, carrying secret knowledge of the crown or the relics it touched. Every village rumor, every whispered warning, hinted that these roads were alive with the echoes of past betrayals. The second hook strikes after the first minute of narration. At one crossroads near the forested border of Brittany, a lone rider was ambushed by a band of masked men. His horse screamed and reared, but the rider was no ordinary man. He bore a pouch of parchment stolen from a monastery, inked with maps and symbols that could lead to the crown. The bandits closed in, blades gleaming, yet the rider's own dagger seemed guided by an unseen hand, striking with uncanny precision. One man fell, clutching a mark on his chest that matched the manuscript's warnings, a circle entwined with 3 serpents. Highwaymen were not mere thieves, they were keepers of secrets, their loyalty shifting like the wind. Some served lords seeking to hide or recover the crown, others served it for reasons lost to history. Chroniclers recorded duels that lasted from dusk to dawn, bodies left where they fell, and treasures vanished into the forests. The crown's influence, the manuscript suggests, was never passive. It drew men to it, corrupted or inspired, leaving trails of blood and madness in its wake. The roads themselves became a theater of fear. Inns claimed patrons vanished in the night, leaving rooms untouched except for cryptic symbols scrawled upon the walls. Bridges collapsed mysteriously, and travelers reported hearing whispers in languages they could not recognize. Some swore the crown itself moved, riding invisible, testing the courage of those who sought it. Those who survived rarely spoke, and when they did, their eyes betrayed the knowledge that death lurked not just in steel, but in shadows and unseen hands. The manuscript preserves tales of one assassin in particular, a man known only as Corbin, who made his way across kingdoms to intercept a courier carrying the crown. He struck silently in a village at the edge of a mist-shrouded river, leaving bodies arranged in patterns that resembled the markings of the crown. Yet when he reached the chest containing the relic, it was gone, vanished as though the shadows themselves had swallowed it. Corbin was never seen again, though some claim he walks the crossroads still, bound to the crown, a phantom of vengeance. Even kings were not safe. One entry tells of a noble murdered at a junction on the borderlands, his horse and retinue intact, but his body left in the road with a single coin placed upon his chest, a token inscribed with a serpent. Chroniclers debated whether it was robbery, political intrigue, or something more sinister, but the manuscript makes its position clear. Where the crown's shadow falls, blood will follow. By the end of the chapter, the crossroads are no longer merely roads, They are a trap, a liminal space where time, history, and legend intersect. Those who travel them risk more than life. They risk being drawn into a story that has echoed across centuries, from Camelot to Blackthorn Keep, from the Tower to the forests of the north. The chapter closes with a warning that chills the blood. One dagger found buried with a nobleman carries symbols never seen before. Follow its path and you will find the crown, but perhaps it will find you first. Deep beneath the arches of ancient abbeys, where sunlight never reached, there existed libraries that were never meant to be found. Their walls were lined not only with parchment and vellum but with secrets so potent that monks, kings, and thieves alike whispered of them in fear. These libraries were repositories of knowledge and power, books that chronicled kingdoms that never were, tomes detailing alchemy that could summon flames or shadows, and codices describing relics that could command the hearts of men. In one such hidden chamber, the manuscript notes, there was a shelf that contained fragments of the crown's history. Pages crumbled under the touch, yet words remained. The crown sleeps between ink and blood, guarded by those who walk in silence. Many had sought these libraries, hoping to discover formulas, maps, or spells that might grant them dominion over kings and kingdoms. Few succeeded. Fewer returned. Here comes the second hook, drawing the listener further in. On a storm-lashed night in Normandy, a scholar named Etienne discovered a trapdoor beneath the floor of a monastery scriptorium. Candles flickered against carved stone as he descended into the darkness. The air smelled of mold and ink, heavy with the weight of centuries. Etienne opened a chest and found manuscripts inscribed with symbols he did not understand, maps that led not to towns or rivers but to shadows themselves. And there, among the scrolls, he found a reference to the unburied crown. It rests where no hand dares to reach, but the eyes of the vigilant may see. Medieval Europe had a hunger for knowledge, yet that hunger was always tempered by fear. Libraries were burned for heresy, books stolen, or hidden beneath false walls. Some chroniclers claimed the church sought to erase records that revealed too much, fearing that knowledge of the crown's power could destabilize the very foundations of Christendom. Others swore that scholars who lingered too long among forbidden texts disappeared, leaving only empty desks and the faint scent of ink in the air. The manuscript warns that the library Etienne found was part of a network, spread across abbeys in France, England, and Italy. Each repository contained clues to the crown, but they were fragmented and coded, readable only by those initiated into secret orders. Some texts described ritualistic safeguards, mirrors that reflected not the reader but their fears, ink that vanished under moonlight, and ink diagrams that seemed to shift when touched by mortal hands. The crown itself had left a mark on those who sought it. Etienne's writings suggest he became obsessed, dreaming of kings who slept beneath hills, of knights riding from the pages, and of ravens circling in libraries that should have remained empty. The manuscript implies that the crown's influence was subtle yet relentless, guiding the scholar to places of peril and wonder alike. Some historians dismissed the stories of lost libraries as fanciful, yet fragments of text have been found centuries later in monasteries, private collections, and even burned books where some ink survived the flames. The manuscript hints that the crown's knowledge was never destroyed, it was merely hidden, scattered across the continent like breadcrumbs for the patient, the daring, or the foolish. And in a final, chilling note, the manuscript concludes the chapter with this warning. The library may not have been destroyed, but it hides still, beneath stone and silence. Those who seek it risk not just knowledge but the crown itself. On the edge of the forest, where sunlight barely touched the forest floor and mist clung to gnarled roots, she appeared. Known only as the Queen of Crows, her presence was both feared and revered. Travelers whispered that her black feathers were not mere adornment, but the living cloak of a woman bound to shadows, carrying the knowledge of the crown itself. Her eyes glimmered with intelligence and her voice, when heard, seemed to echo from 1,000 hidden mouths. Legends tell of her origins in the twilight of the 14th century, born of noble blood yet marked by the occult. She wandered from village to village, speaking truths that others feared to utter and seeing events before they occurred. Those who crossed her path often swore that she commanded the crows, that they circled overhead, their cries forming words in the wind. To some she was a witch, to others a guardian, ensuring that the crown remained hidden from those unworthy. The second hook strikes after the first minute of narration. One night, a wandering knight followed a trail of black feathers deep into the forest. He believed he would find treasure, perhaps even the crown itself. Instead he encountered her. The crows fell silent, their wings motionless as though the air itself held its breath. She spoke his name before he could introduce himself and asked in a voice both commanding and gentle, Do you seek power or do you seek ruin? The manuscript preserves stories of her dealings with kings and outlaws alike. She demanded oaths in exchange for guidance, weaving contracts that bound men and women to invisible threads of loyalty or curse. Some who swore to her emerged victorious, yet haunted, their victories carrying a price that grew heavier with each passing year. Others vanished, leaving nothing behind but their shadows etched on forest floors, as if she had claimed their essence to protect the secrets of the crown. The queen's powers were said to extend beyond mere observation. She could speak with the dead, summon visions of distant lands, and unravel the intentions of those who sought the crown. Crows, her familiars, acted as her eyes and ears across kingdoms, returning nightly with reports of movements, betrayals, and whispers. Legends claim that entire armies were diverted or destroyed by her interventions, though chroniclers rarely dared to write it openly. The manuscript hints that her knowledge of the crown predates even the fall of Camelot. She is described as a descendant not by blood alone, but by the inheritance of a secret lineage, one sworn to protect the relic from those who would wield it to chaos. Her forest domain was both sanctuary and prison, a place where the veil between the natural and supernatural thinned, and where the crown's influence could be observed in its purest form. Yet even her power had limits. The manuscript warns of the crown's own agency. It did not wait passively for hands to claim it. It moved across lands and centuries, drawing people into peril, guiding its guardians and punishing the unworthy. The Queen of Crows, for all her skill and knowledge, could only act as its steward, never its master. The chapter closes with a final ominous note. The queen watches still, her crows at the ready. The crown stirs beneath distant soil, and those who seek it will first pass beneath her gaze, or never return at all. Hidden among jagged cliffs and dense, windswept forests, the forgotten keep had long been erased from maps and memory. Travelers who stumbled upon its moss-covered walls often spoke of a strange unease, as though the stones themselves remembered centuries of blood and betrayal. It was here, the manuscript insists, that one fragment of the unburied crown was kept, guarded by shadows, curses, and the memory of all who had tried and failed to possess it. The first hook seizes attention immediately. A young knight, weary from months of travel and burdened with cryptic maps from the monastery manuscript, discovered the keep one storm-lashed evening. Lightning struck the cliffs around him, revealing the keep's silhouette against a sky torn with fire and black clouds. Its gates hung crooked, its towers scarred by the elements and time, yet the aura of danger was palpable. He could feel the crown's influence, subtle but insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The second hook draws the listener further in. Inside, corridors twisted unnaturally, as though the keep itself resisted intrusion. Portraits of long-dead lords glared from walls, their eyes seeming to follow every step. Torches flickered though no wind disturbed them, casting shadows that moved independently of the night. Then he heard it, the faintest sound of metal ringing against metal, like a crown being shifted though no one else was there. The manuscript recounts the keep's history in fragmented detail. Built during the late 12th century, it once served as a fortress of a minor baron who had aligned himself with the Templars. Rumor held that he had been entrusted with one piece of the crown, the rest scattered to prevent its power from concentrating in one hand. After his sudden disappearance, the keep was abandoned, yet its wards and traps endured, secret passages, hidden pits, and runes etched in stone to confuse the unworthy. Legends tell of other seekers who came before the young knight. A sorceress, drawn by the whispers of the crown, disappeared into the dungeons. A band of mercenaries entered, following the manuscript's clues, only to vanish, leaving behind their armor, broken weapons, and the echo of cries in empty halls. Even the Queen of Crows is said to have observed from the forest edge, ensuring that the keep remained undisturbed until the proper heir or fool arrived. The manuscript hints that the crown itself was no passive relic. It tested those who approached, manipulating corridors, conjuring illusions, and amplifying the fears of the living. The young knight faced visions of betrayal, flames consuming the keep, and spectral warriors demanding loyalty or death. Only by trusting his wits and resisting the crown's seduction could he advance deeper. As the night stretched into dawn, he reached the inner sanctum, a circular chamber lined with mirrors that reflected not his image, but the shadows of those who had failed before him. On a pedestal at the center lay a fragment of the crown, glowing faintly as if it recognized him. The knight reached forward, and then the chamber shook, walls cracking, shadows writhing as if the keep itself rejected his claim. The chapter ends with a breathless cliffhanger. The crown stirs within its pedestal, alive with the power of centuries. And as the walls begin to crumble, the knight realizes that retrieving it may awaken forces far older and darker than he ever imagined. The chamber trembled as the knight stood before the pedestal. Light refracted through cracked mirrors, casting fragmented images of every seeker who had ever dared approach the crown. Whispers filled the air, overlapping cries of triumph, despair, and warning. He could feel it now, its presence was no longer subtle. The crown pulsed as if alive, feeding on centuries of desire, ambition, and fear. The first hook grips immediately. The knight reached for it, and in that instant visions exploded behind his eyelids. Camelot's halls burned with betrayal, Templar knights fell into shadow, the Black Death spread like smoke over Europe, and the Witch of the North Woods raised her arms in silent command over the forest. Every figure, every story from the manuscript converged here, and all eyes seemed to be watching him. The crown was not just an object. It was a force, a consciousness older than any king, older than kingdoms themselves. The second hook comes after a heartbeat of suspense. As his fingers brushed the crown, the chamber's mirrors cracked violently. Shadows lunged from the walls, coiling around him, voices whispering impossible promises. Power beyond measure, immortality, dominion over men and nations. Yet he also felt the weight of every life lost to the crown's legacy, the endless blood spilled, the betrayals, the plagues, the vanished scholars and warriors. The crown demanded more than obedience. It demanded sacrifice, and the price was never clear until it was paid. He hesitated, realizing that the crown's power was entwined with the very fate of the realm. To lift it would be to awaken the full force of history's darkest moments. Every choice, every oath broken or honored, flowed into it like rivers into an ocean. And still it called him, promising a vision of unity, of restoration, but at what cost? The manuscript reveals a final secret. The crown could choose its bearer, but it also judged them. Some who wore it were consumed by ambition, others shattered by the burden of knowledge, and some vanished entirely, leaving only echoes and shadows behind. To claim it was not to hold power, it was to merge with it, body and soul, mind and memory. With trembling hands, the knight considered the centuries of those who came before him. Arthur and the Knights of Camelot, the Templars, the Witch of the North Woods, the Alchemists, the Queen of Crows, the countless seekers of the lost libraries and cursed crossroads. Each had been touched by the crown, each left a trace of themselves, and each paid in full. And then he understood. The crown was not meant to rule kingdoms, it was meant to endure them, to be the guardian of secrets, the witness to ambition, the measure of mortality. To take it, to awaken it fully, was to risk being lost within its shadows forever. The knight withdrew his hand, stepping back, sweat glistening on his brow. The crown's pulse slowed, its whispers fading as if acknowledging his decision. The chamber fell silent, and for a moment he could hear only the beating of his own heart. Outside, the wind rose in the forest, carrying the cries of ravens, the rustle of leaves, and the whispers of those who had long ago vanished. The manuscript concludes with one final line, a warning and a testament. The crown waits still, patient and eternal. It does not call the unworthy, but it never forgets. Those who seek it may find it, or it may find them. And as the knight stepped into the forest, leaving the keep behind, he felt the weight of history pressing gently on his shoulders, the shadow of the crown lingering, eternal and unseen.